Hey everyone, welcome to our webinar, Bridging Science and Business, Interactive Analytics Through Data Visualization, in which we'll be discussing how to leverage data to gain a competitive edge. Thank you so much for joining. Let's wait just another second or so for some more people to join before I officially present our panelists today. Okay, see people joining in. Sometimes there's like a little lag for Zoom. Okay, well, if you just joined, welcome to this webinar. So glad to have you. Let me introduce our panelists for today's webinar. Awesome. So we have Eleanor Dixon-Broche, Product Manager at Research Solutions, to join us today, as well as Heidi Nichols, Customer Success Manager at Research Solutions. Welcome, Eleanor and Heidi.
Thank you.
And allow me to introduce myself. My name is Julia Heeson. I'm the Director of Growth Marketing here at Research Solutions, and I'll be moderating our conversation today. Okay, so a couple of quick housekeeping items. You're on listen-in mode, so you don't have to worry about background noise. If you do have questions, the chat is enabled, so you can reach out to all of us. And as well, we'll have dedicated time to answer all of your questions. So on Zoom below where it says Q&A, you can click there, and then you can add your questions as soon as they come up. And then most likely we'll be answering them towards the end. So if we don't answer it right away, you'll be knowing that we'll get to them towards the end of the webinar. And then also this webinar is being recorded. So if you want to rewatch a specific part or share it with your colleagues afterwards, you can definitely do so. I'll be sending it out in email, probably like within the hour after the webinar, so you can receive that copy. Okay, a little bit about what we'll be discussing today on the webinar before I'll be handing it over. So we'll be talking about the evolution of data analytics and visualization to begin with. What are the benefits of data analytics and visualization? Then just like the counterpart, what are some challenges and considerations that we should know of? Data visualization tools and platforms, also the ones that you'll be using. So we'll be having some polls to really get to know what it looks like on your end today. And then we'll discuss the future of data analytics and visual tools. And as I mentioned, we'll be ending with the live Q&A session for which you can add your questions as soon as they come up. Okay, and then Research Solutions, if you aren't familiar with us yet, we have been around since roughly 2006, and we simplify and streamline how organizations discover, acquire, and manage, and also create scientific articles and data. As of last year, Resolute AI is part of our product family, and part of the logo that you saw on the previous slides, and where Heidi and Eleanor originally came from. You'll be learning a bit more about some of the core abilities of kind of like AI and NLP technologies, part of the products that belong to our product family. Okay, then let's see what we've got prepared here for you. Okay, so we definitely do want to incorporate all of you. So I'll be pulling up a poll here, and you can see the question here already. Let me just pull it up. You can read through it as I go. So the question is, how often do you interact with visualized data or analytic platforms? So just to see what your usage is like today. So option A, several times a day. B, once or twice a day. C, a few times a week. Once a week or fewer is D, and E is never. Okay, seeing people fill it out here. Eleanor, Heidi, you can probably see it as well. Okay, one more second. Okay, let me end the poll and let's look at the results. Okay, so it looks like the majority, about 50% of all of you are using it like a few times a week. And then we have quite a lot also several times a day, which, yeah, that's awesome. That's quite a lot. And then a few also once a week or even fewer. Okay, so mixed audience, although all of you seem to know what we're talking about today. Okay, so let me now hand it over to our panelists. Off to you.
Thanks so much, Julia. Thanks for the poll, everybody. It's really interesting just for us to see again how much data analytics and visualization play into your day-to-day or your weekly routine. So I do want to start off our presentation today just to talk a little bit about how data analytics have evolved over time. I think it's actually quite interesting and speaks a lot to the different areas where we've been able to innovate, and also how it changes the way we process and just think about information. So as you'll see in the slide, I'm going to start sort of in the 1950s and 60s, where we see, of course, computerized or electronic records, come into the scene. But data analytics in general was born out of a necessity to just draw meaning and insights from raw data. So, of course, it was a purely manual process for quite a long time until commercial computers were invented. But even then, the amount of data that was available was relatively small. So we already started to see some different innovations take place here with the automation of data processing mostly, things like transactional data. But it wasn't until the late 1950s that when the US Census Bureau used automated data processing to tabulate the census, that we really saw the power of data analytics, and people started to realize just how much time and resources that it could save them. So then we move on to the 1970s, where we have the birth of sort of what's known as business intelligence today. This is fueled by the rise of things like relational databases. IBM released one, and then also SQL, or standard query language. So these things did help us interact with information, also add structure to information that was previously in a very raw form or unstructured. So it did change the way that we could understand and process data through those types of databases. We also see the first spreadsheet program come in the late 1970s. Apple released a version called VisiCalc. So this also allowed users themselves or individuals to interact with spreadsheets on their personal computers, things of that nature. In the late 1990s, moving on here, as well as the early 2000s, this is where we really see big data. And this generally refers to just the rapid exponential growth of data at that time because of a new thing called the internet. So of course, that's an exciting time where everyone has access to all this new information, and because all of these resources are now available through the internet, people are struggling with the amount of data, the type of data, variety of data. And as a result, it's quite fragmented and inconsistent, unorganized. So what we see generally as the biggest challenge here is just aggregating all the data together so that companies and organizations could make sense of it. We also see an increase in competitive pressure here. It's higher than ever before just because of computerization and globalization efforts from companies here, but also things like networking, people being able to connect globally across their industries, across their markets, and other factors like the new free trade agreements. So again, because of the challenges that all of this presented, companies did start to turn to things like data warehouses to aggregate all this information together and also give them a consistent way of accessing all this new information they have access to. So this does bring us into the 2010s when companies had deeper insights into their customers, as well as their internal operations and their competition. So cloud computing also did make it easier and more efficient, as well as more affordable for companies to store, manage, and analyze all of their data. And then in 2013, Tableau also went public. So all of a sudden, there's this growing demand for intuitive and user-friendly kind of self-service data visualization tools. So this in turn leads to advancements in data analysis techniques, such as like predictive analytics, but also things like machine learning and artificial intelligence. So that brings us all to today, where we now hear the term AI everywhere. And for good reason. It does help us gain deeper insights at a much faster rate than before, and allows us for natural language questioning of a large body of data. So this does further democratize data in analytics, as well as critical insights from the data. And then, of course, it does have its limitations. We're going to discuss a little bit more about this later on in the presentation. But I'm sure most of you have heard of ChatGPT, which does have a tendency to hallucinate, but it has, I think, only driven further innovation within the research community, specifically in regards to how LLMs aggregate information, but also, trying to control the sources that it is using to make sure that it is producing verified and truthful information. So again, we're going to revisit that topic a little bit later in the presentation, but I thought this was an interesting way to lead up to some of the things that we'll talk about in a moment. All right, so this just does summarize some of the things I talked about before, sort of what makes a good visualization, and also really how it can benefit organizations as well as people as individuals. So great data analytics and visualizations do bring together multiple sources of information, so uniting previously disparate sources of data. It also can answer specific questions, identify outliers, and uncover trends that otherwise would have remained hidden. And then it does democratize complex data, so making it accessible to a broader audience, allowing individual people to also create and interact with those visualizations. Of course, it saves time, money, as well as other resources. And in turn, I think this just impacts all parts of an organization and all team members within. So yeah, again, I think data and analytics, whether you're interacting with them on a daily, a weekly basis, multiple times a day, I think they do add a ton of value when it comes to understanding, customers, the market, and of course, your own internal operations. Okay, of course, with creating visualizations and different analytics, there are some key challenges and I think considerations that have to be examined. And of course, like certain things that need to be addressed to make sure that we are maximizing on the benefits of these visualizations. The first is with data integrity. We have a phrase that we often use here called garbage in, garbage out. So if your data is not clean, if it's not organized, if it's not verified, it's going to be difficult to ensure that your visualizations and analytics are accurate or insightful. So we try to, we definitely want to encourage people to reduce gaps in any data they may have access to. So incorporating different sources of information, but again, aggregating it into a single source. Ensuring that your data is properly labeled, enriching with additional metadata if needed, but also tagging, kind of categorizing that data you have access to so that you have more information to input into your visualizations and analytics. And of course, again, making sure it isn't fragmented or siloed is a key component there. There's also scalability and complexity. So of course, there are many challenges when it comes to processing large amounts of data. This can often slow down performance of analytics. So that's one consideration. Also, sophisticated queries can be quite intensive. They can require pretty technical expertise as well to conduct. But it's also important to choose the appropriate type of visualization. We'll definitely be talking more about this later in the presentation today. So I'm going to move on to user experience and interpretation here. So we see kind of a challenge with finding a balance between the complexity or simplicity, if you want to look at it that way, simplicity of these visualizations, but also the interactivity, how user-friendly they are. And this is why we see a lot of self-service platforms available in the market today. I think everybody has their own preferences, so that is one challenge as well. But that is a focus to make sure that the analytics and the platforms themselves are very user-friendly. On the flip side, overly complex visualizations can often be misinterpreted, or they can be manipulated to show certain aspects of the data while hiding others. So that's another consideration to take into account as well. Moving on to technical skills and tools. So I mentioned there are a number of tools available in the market today. We'll also be going through some of those later in the presentation. But things like super complex analytics do require, again, just advanced technical skills to be able to set up, to interact with, or to query against. So proficiency is needed there, sometimes within programming languages as well. And then there are, of course, limitations. So not every tool is going to be perfect. In fact, I don't think there's any single tool that's perfect on the market today. I think this is why a lot of companies are trying to build their own internal databases and data analytics. So yeah, it does come to, to preference, but also how much time, resources, and budget you have to be able to dedicate some of those, building those platforms internally. That does lead me to maintenance. So oftentimes when you are building those tools internally, of course, you have to make sure you have not only the right data, you have to make sure that you have the new data to be able to refresh those visualizations and analytics. So updating those can be costly, not only in time and resources, but also there's version control. So again, there's a lot of capabilities and things that data analytics can support with. There's many benefits, but a lot of these do have to be considered and addressed just to make sure that we're receiving the maximum benefits from them. All right. And I think that brings us to our next poll here. So I'll let Julia set that up, but we really just want to know, in your opinion, within your organization or in a personal level, what challenges you see typically on it when you're using analytics. So do you think it's to do with data integrity, which again, I talked about in the last slide, scalability, complexity, user experience or interpretation? We also have security in here. There's obviously a lot of security concerns with things like AI, machine learning, but also technical proficiency and maintenance. So yeah, we would love to hear from you what you think the most common challenge you see is on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, and this is a multi-select, so feel free to, if you're like, oh, I can't decide between these two, you can select both of them.
Awesome. Thanks, Julia.
Okay, see the chat here as well. Greatest challenge, people asking for data viz project that are much more complex than they realize. Yes, I can relate to that. Thanks for sharing. Okay, I think we've got all the responses in. Let me end and share with all of you.
Interesting. Yeah, it looks like user experience and interpretation was the most common answer, followed by technical proficiency and then data integrity.
Nice. Thanks
Great.
for sharing, everyone.
All right. And then from here, I'm going to hand it over to Eleanor, who's going to talk to you about some of the data analytics platforms that are on the market today.
Thanks, Heidi. So actually, I think, Sharon, your comment about asking for something that's much more complex than people often realize is a great segue into just talking about tools in general. So just for a little background, I actually started my career in science illustration. And the reason that I was very passionate about it is I didn't want to give up art and I didn't want to give up science. And communicating science is the only way that you're going to get people to care about what is being done in the end. If you think about reading any kind of paper, and if there were no charts, no graphs, no tables that are included in visualization, like it was just straight text, it's a lot to unpack. And now multiply that across thousands of papers and trying to understand any kind of trends. It's a no-brainer why you need to visualize data. So this is obviously not a comprehensive list. There are tons and tons and tons of tools on the market. There's just some really popular ones that often come up. I'm going to talk about each one on this list, but I'm also going to talk about a bit more in this slide and going forward, like how to actually pick the right one. So that'll come later, but I'll just go through these ones just to give you a sense of how to start thinking about picking the right tool. So the first thing to think about is, what are you actually trying to achieve? What is the outcome of this? Like, are you trying to communicate this to other people in the team? What kind of knowledge barrier are you dealing with? Like, do they know the stuff inside out? Are they going to be completely new to the information? How accessible does it need to be? How understandable? Are you trying to communicate this to higher management who they're really just interested in the big picture, in the trends, and you need to get your point across quickly, and they need to understand, is it going up? Is it going down? The aggregations, all of that stuff. So that's the first thing to really take into consideration is what is your end goal with this visualization? I would include, like, if it's just for you, you're just having to assess how do you read data best. That's also happens a lot. Like people, you just need to create data visualizations for yourself. Next, what are your constraints? These can be financial. Can you even pay for a tool right now, a new tool? How many people are going to be using it? Is it going to be a team purchase? Is it a company-wide purchase? All of these things must be taken into factor because that determines what your budget is. What can you actually spend? Some tools are more expensive than others, and they're more complex to set up. And then this leads us into resources. So that resource is not just financial, it's the people involved. So if you're going to use a tool that's going to require like the data, if you have data scientists or data engineers on your team, you need to get their buy-in, whether they want to use it. How do they already know how to use some of these tools? Are they willing to learn and use new tool? Who else is going to have to access it? Who's going to be updating it? All the stuff that Heidi mentioned about maintenance, those usually require people. And so what people are going to be involved, once you have a sense of that, then you can actually pick a new tool. And this is obviously assuming like you're trying to pick a new tool rather than just use what you have existing today. So I'm just going to go from top to bottom, very generally focusing on, is it easy to use? What are the good use cases for it? And what might be some like basic challenges? So you can kind of get a sense of how to start thinking about these tools. So with Tableau, you can create these interactive and shareable dashboards of lots of different graphs and charts. It's fairly user-friendly, but it does have a pretty steep learning curve when you're first getting set up with it. So it's really great for someone that's just wants to go in, see it, and leave. But for the person that's actually going to interact with it, like it does require like definitely some learning. It's a lot easier to use than it used to be for sure. It can connect to lots of external resources, and it's good for exploring data. So if you're just trying to get a sense of, you don't really know where you're going necessarily in your analysis, Tableau is actually pretty good for that because you can be really flexible in how you're looking at the data. And because of the dashboards, if you set it up in a way that you're thinking about the person reading it, it's a really good shareable tool you can use with lots of different audiences. Power BI, if you're a Microsoft company and you use visualizations, highly likely you have Power BI. So pros are, it's going to connect with all of your Microsoft products pretty much. It's going to struggle a little bit when you get to really, really big data sets that aren't necessarily connected through Microsoft. And that may be a bit laggy, but it's very powerful in what you can do. That said, it requires quite a lot of people within your organization to set up because it's an enterprise type of service. There are different levels to it, but usually it's pretty hard to set up all by yourself unless you know exactly how to use it. And get it going. It's pretty heavy lift, but because it's so comprehensive when it comes to Microsoft products, it's great for like enterprise level of dashboarding. So if you think about everyone in the company needs to know how this data is going, you can set up those dashboards, and it's really good for creating those type of reports. Next thing is D3. So D3.js is a JavaScript library. So that's really for web developers to create graphs and charts. It can be incredibly complex. It's super customizable. So you do, I'm not gonna say anything, but almost anything you kind of want to do with it. There's tons of different types of way to visualize data. So it's extremely flexible. However, you do need someone that actually understands how to build using that library, which usually means like a web developer of some sort, engineer, software engineer, that type of thing. And if they haven't used it before, it's pretty complex. There's a bit of steep learning curve, but you can do a lot with it. And you can integrate it within your own company's website. You can have dashboards that are very, very customized dashboards. It does require a level of maintenance, obviously, because it's created using software, so there's such things like updates and things like that. So depending on your resources, it can be a great option because you can really create whatever you want. The downside is it really creates the need for someone to understand data visualizations internally. So someone internally really needs to understand exactly what the output is because it's so flexible. You can't just go in and be like, all right, I want to look at it in 5 different ways and then pick the best way from that. It's like you kind of need to know where you're going from the beginning and how you want to customize it. And then the next is Excel. I'm going to guess most people on this call are familiar with Excel. If not, it's just spreadsheets. There are tons of inbuilt visualizations. It's not customizable and it's not great with like large amounts of data. It can do like, when I say large, I mean millions and millions of data points. So I think Excel caps out at like 1 million rows and 1 million columns. You can do obviously aggregations to get around that, but it's going to get a little clunky the bigger the data set. The great thing though, it's super accessible. It's really easy to learn. You can do it for yourself. If you don't have a lot of resources, whether it's financial or people, you can get something going with Excel really quickly. The downside is the maintenance part. So like any document, it requires to be maintained, and documents can get lost in the ether of SharePoint or whatever system you're using at the moment. It's like people's computers even. So the accessibility piece is a bit harder. And then the last two, there's some of the, I'm not going to say lesser known, but the top ones are really like the really popular ones, but there's tons in this category of, I would say, like medium-sized companies that are creating these type of visualizations. So I included these just to help, again, trying to think about what you want to pick. So Plotly is, you can do lots of different types of graphs and charts, but it's really designed around plotting data. So if you're looking to do like the bubble chart that you can see on the right-hand side, it's not going to be great for that. But if you're just looking for a really good scatter plot, lots of customizable features, it's really good in that sense. Grafana is really designed around time series data. So it's not going to be great for just general exploration, like I mentioned in Tableau, where you want to like slice and dice your information 100 different ways. But anyone that wants to see their information in a chronological format, or where time is really the important piece, that's where it's going to shine. And that's why it would be a good option for that. So this is, again, like I was saying, just thinking about what is your goal, what are your constraints, how are you trying to visualize the data. So we can go to the next slide, please.
Sorry, I'm jumping around here.
No worries. I think there's a
Okay.
so I think we have a free text answer thing. Great. So it really, what analysis and visualization tools are you using today? This can include anything I didn't mention. However you create them, like I think like Excel is often like the one that people will create by themselves, but yeah, anything that you use is appropriate, obviously.
Yeah, let's wait another second and then let's look at some of the tools that everyone here is using. Still see responses coming through. Okay, let's see. Okay, let me read out a few of these. I'm not sure if you can still see it, probably not. So Excel, Canva, Excel and Tableau, Power BI, Spotfire. Personally haven't heard of that. I don't know if you have. And then a few more times Excel. So it definitely seems like Excel is #1 amongst everyone on this call.
Yeah, Excel is super accessible, and it's I'm going to get into a little bit more about why I do think actually Excel is a great starting point. So actually you can go to the next slide. So all of these examples, they look beautiful. They're very pretty. And sometimes they're going to be really good and relevant, but it really matters, like I said before, what you're trying to do. And Excel, because it's so accessible, is sometimes all that you need. You don't need to go and like have these like super fancy tools all the time to get what you need. It's only appropriate to go and get them when the need arises. Like if your dashboards is a good example. So if you have a lot of people, like teams, teams can change. People come and they get new jobs, they change jobs, get new team members all the time. It's really hard for people who are onboarded onto a new company, and when people leave, conversely, to maintain all this type of visualization if it's not in one spot. So that's when a dashboard is like a really good idea, and then when Excel is like maybe not as appropriate. However, for creating a lot of visualizations on the fly, Excel is going to be completely fine. And so going back to trying to pick like the right kind of visualizations, like you can see on here, like there's a lot of like pretty charts and graphs, but they're not always going to be appropriate. So if we go to the next slide. Thanks, Heidi. It's thinking, like I said, the goals. So we have 4 big buckets. There's probably a bit more than this, but this is generally how most people are going to think about data. So the first one is distribution. So you're just trying to get a sense of what is the makeup of a whole, or even like, so like the box plot, like over time. So there's still like a whole over any period of time, or a whole over like infinite, so all time, like the pie chart, or donut, I think technically, because it has a whole. You don't need to know all of the other information. You're just trying to get a sense what there's a lot of and what there's not a lot of in comparison to each other. That's when pie charts and box plots are really great. The difference obviously between the pie chart and the box plot is the pie chart is really just looking at it specific only from a distribution level. Like there's no other information, there's no time information, there's no like outliers that are taken into consideration. It's just looking at the whole. We look at the box plot on to the side of it. We have not only distribution over different periods of time, we can also compare those. We also have information about outliers. So we can see like, yeah, it's here, it's really dense, and then it starts to get really sporadic on the edges. And these have really big outliers versus these don't have big outliers. You get a lot more information, but it's starting to get a bit more granular. And this is, again, who is looking at this information? Are they going to be able to understand this chart, or is the donut going to be more appropriate in this case? This is a good audience. What do you need to get out of the information? How well are they going to be able to read it? Number 2 is outlier identification. There's actually a lot of different ways to do this. I think a lot of times people think about scatter plots. Heat maps are also a great way to do this. There'll be an example coming up of a heat map that we'll go through in a little bit more detail. But trying to find like everything is in here, or everything is concentrated here, but this thing is like way out here. Why? Like sometimes like that outlier can be an indication of it's something new, something went wrong, something is changing. And especially if you could look at the graph over time and you keep adding data, if that outlier then starts to gather more information, so there's more and more, not like starts to gather more plots, basically, like there's more of a concentration. It's no longer an outlier, so things are trending in that direction. Versus if something has stayed an outlier for a really, really long time, depending on what your question is, might be interesting, or it might be really easy to be like, not interested in that. We really want to focus on where the dense information is. So the next one is relational. So this is this is really applicable to people. This is the first example I think many people think of. So I am related to Heidi and Julia because I work with Heidi and Julia at Research Solutions. We have that thing in common. However, if we were to look where we live, we don't live in the same place. Like Heidi lives in a different state than I, and Julia lives in a different country than I am. So we are not related if we're looking in the context of place. So this is when it's really important to think like, what is the context of your relationship? However, there's a lot of relationships outside of just people. There can be relationships between papers through citations. There can be relationships through, if we think about patent data, through assignees and inventors and where they have worked. So then you can start to get a sense of collaboration. There's a lot of way to think about relationships, and this is where it's really good if you're looking into a new area and you may not have a sense of like how everything kind of works together. If you have metadata on top of your documents, so you like tag it, for example, and it just tells you what the main thing is about. So you could have a document that's about a few documents about asthma, some things about, I don't know, glosses, something completely different. However, in the context of the paper, they're actually got the same, the author is the same person. Those papers are now related to each other, even if the content wasn't related to begin with. Conversely, if you had two papers talking about asthma, nothing else in common, inventors, assignees, they are related. So it's lots of different ways to think about relationships. And then the last big bucket is comparative. So a stacked bar chart is actually ridiculously cool for this. I love these. There's a really specific example actually for like patents. If you're looking at filing status versus applied, so like applied and granted, and you're looking at a specific context, you can see basically, are the granted applications increasing or decreasing over time, also in relation to how many are actually being applied in that same period of time. Like, is more money being put into this area? Is it going down? Is it easier to get a patent, harder to get a patent in this area? It's a really cool way to look at that type of data. Okay, we can go to the next slide. Okay, so I mentioned heat maps earlier to look at trend identification. So we, if it's really dark red, there's more data there. If it's white, there's nothing. If there's a 1, it's pale pink. Obviously, there's only one piece of data there. So that's how to just look at the coloring. This is looking at patent data. And if we look specifically like, so at the top, it says family size. And then below that, there'll be, the columns are 1, 2, 3, etc. patents per family. So for anyone that's not familiar with patents, the more patents there are in a family, basically means someone is either trying to expand the space or they're trying to make sure they are the player in that space. So think 20 patents a family, coming from the same company, they're putting a lot of money in this area. They want to be big players in this area. They are covering their bases. If they have 1 patent in this family, they're starting to come into this area. Or maybe they went in and it didn't go great and then they came back out again. So dates also matter. On the other side, we have assignee name. So that's just saying who applied for the patent, the company. And then next to that, filing status. So we're looking at patents that have been applied and patents that have been granted. So an applied patent, it's gone in and we're waiting to see if it's a real patent or not. And whatever patent office has been applied to, if they're going to issue the patent, the granted patent. And a granted patent just means like that company now can develop over that patent and no one else can. This is obviously really important for drugs. So once someone like has a drug and it's patented, they get to develop that drug and no one else can come into that space until the patent expires, and that's when generics come in. So we can look through trends in this heat map, but we can also infer quite a lot of other information that would otherwise be pretty hard to tell. So we can tell just by looking, let's say, Novo Nordisk. If we look at their applications, they are increasing, roughly increasing over time. So it goes like 3, 1, 7, 14, 3, 11. Like they're putting a lot of stuff out, and their granted applications are lagging a little bit. But either way, they have quite a lot of applications and granted applications in this space. That means that they are putting a lot of money into this area of patents. However, if we looked at, say, I think it's Hanmi, they had nothing in the 1 to 2 patent family area, and they have a few in the 20 and 10 patent family area. That tells me that they're putting a lot of money into the same area. So not only the same topic, but the same patent family, that they really want to be big players in this area. So there's a lot of information like you could really get out of this just by trying to get a sense of like who's putting money into what areas. So I spend a lot of time like talking about the specific heat map, but that can give you a sense of like with a heat map, you can slice and dice your information like a ton of different ways. that's kind of hard to do. If you're just looking at like a line chart or a bar chart or anything that's sort of pie chart, something is a little bit more simplified. Okay, we can go to the next slide. So this is, so we're just talking about like a heat map is really a table, right? And so Scite.ai, which is part of the Research Solutions family, at the moment has Assistant. And Assistant allows you to ask questions in a natural language way, so you don't have to create a complex search. And then it gives you like, a summarized answer with a bunch of citations, which is great and really useful that you can interact with it. You can use it as like a cool first draft, and like you have all the citations that come with it. However, if you are really need to know very specific pieces of information from a lot of different sources, that's a lot harder to get a sense of, because it's like condensing the information actually too much for that use case. And this is where tables are very helpful. So on the right-hand side, there's just an example of a very, very simplified idea of where we're going with this. So obviously we know what the publication title is. We know how many citation counts there are, forward citations, and then we also know who the authors are. However, in the last column where it says observed outcomes, that is not a piece of information that just lives, that we can just in the document itself, that we can just pull and put in the document. So the way that this would be done is you can call the column whatever you want, you put in your own prompt, and then it'll pull out the information for each of these documents, and then it'll put it in table format. So depending on what you're interested in, you can create this big table, export it, do what you want with it, and then you can use it if you are pulling out, say, more like metric-based information, and input it into any of these tools that you're using. So if you are using Excel, you can now actually create a visualization based off of a specific amount of documents. So I think we have a way to allow you to sign up if you're interested in either updates about this, you want to be a beta tester, you just want more information. It's free text, so however you would like to get more information or would like to be part of testing, like feel free to put that information in and we can let you know as we progress.
Yeah, I can leave this just open for another minute or two. So feel free to drop your social media account if you prefer that way, or email address, whatever you prefer, in this open text field. And then we'll make sure to let you know as soon as we have updates to share. So I think we can just leave it open and move to the next slide in the meanwhile.
Cool. So I think we're really going to tie things together here on this slide. So Research Solutions, we have made a couple of different acquisitions in the past year, the acquisition of Resolute AI and the acquisition of Scite.ai. So the intention here is really just to change the way that people search for, manage, and access all this scientific information. So, of course, analysis is a part of it. We've talked about a few different interactive and AI-driven tools here at Research Solutions. There is Foundation, which helps to search and analyze external information, such as patent information, which Eleanor did show an example of, but also information from technology transfer opportunities, grant information globally, and even information from clinical trials. So those heat maps that she showed are often used to interact with that data within the platform and can be customized to input specific types of information, and also show a few different relationships across the data sets as well. And then to bring it back to Scite. So earlier in the presentation, I mentioned, of course, the entry of ChatGPT into recent data analytics tools, and of course some of the downsides to it, such as like hallucinations and using a corpus of information, also fabricating some of that information. So of course that has forced, I think, a lot of innovators in this space to look at how can we use the best parts of, GPT or other LLMs to summarize scientific information? And this is where I think Scite has really made huge advancements with their assistant capability. So through Assistant, you can ask a natural language question. It will then conduct a search for you, and you can sort of edit or see into the search strategy that it's using. It will then only search against published scientific literature. So the corpus of information that it's pulling from is defined, and again, it's going to reduce or prevent things like those hallucinations. The other thing that the assistant will do is it uses the citation statements on those publications to rank and also select a subset of publications that will be relevant to the query, but also have information to support that the statements made in that article are supported and that it's repeatable research. So all of these things do play into how Assistant generates its responses and can summarize insights from the published research. So that is one of the key things we wanted to talk about here today. And then Eleanor also showed you some of the advancements we're making, developments to help turn insights from publications into structured and formatted information. So if you're interested in learning about any of these other research tools, we would love to hear from you. Eager to see who signed up for the beta testing or just updates from Scite. But yeah, hopefully this gives you some insight into, of course, just the general knowledge and realm of data analytics visualizations, but also how Research Solutions is trying to support the analysis of all this information. Eleanor, is there anything you would add to that?
Nope.
Cool.
I'll be adding a link in the chat here. So as Heidi mentioned, if you would like to learn more about any of the products that you just kind of introduced, feel free to head over to that link. They can kind of select which product you're interested in. If you don't know, you can just leave that empty. And then we'd be happy to connect you to the right person. And then also adding another link, if this is of any interest to you, we did just a bit ago run a webinar series about large language models and how to make most of them in research specifically. So we have the replays available as well as a prompting guide handbook. So it's like a few pages with, just a guide on how you can best make use of large language models in research specifically. So if you're interested, head over there. You can fill out the form and then you'll get access to both webinars and the handbook directly. Okay, let's move on to questions. I see a few already. Okay, so the first one is it possible to build interactive dashboards to visualize my data using AI? If so, which specific AI tools can you recommend to help me?
Yes. Okay. So because you said dashboards and not just say like a single interactive, Power BI is probably going to be your best bet because of the integration with Copilot. And I believe so obviously Copilot is using large language models / probably OpenAI and a whole bunch of other different ways that they're combining that. That's probably the one I would recommend. Again, because you said dashboards. And then I can see the second question. So I'm just going to, I'll read it out and then it will kind of go with the last question that you just asked. So have companies like Stata Cores, IBM, SPSS, R, et cetera, built in AI in their systems to ease analysis and visualization. And the last part of your question was asking for recommendations using AI to get into visualizations. So a lot of the important thing to think about is when you say using AI, it's where are you using it? Is it in you're asking a question and it automatically generates an interactive analytic? I think that's what a lot of people think of. Or is it applying AI to the data itself so that you can then create better visualizations from any of the tools I mentioned or any other tools? So the tool itself may not be using AI, but your data has been enhanced and enriched using AI. There's also whether you're looking at doing predictive analytics. So thinking about okay, I want to know where things are going in the future. I have my own feelings about like doing predictive analytics. It's you know, it's just models. It's based on like what's happened in the past and based on what we know is in the future, like which is most people, I don't think anyone can read the future, but you can make your best guesses. Where is it going to go from there? I would be careful using tools where you're not entirely sure where the data is coming from. So if they say they're using AI, I would just make sure that it's like, you know, where the data is coming from, kind of have a sense of what they're doing to the data. And most companies, like, you can at least talk to them and have a sense of why they're where are they incorporating the AI, and how is it going to make your outcome better. So is it that you're trying to save time? You don't have the ability to create analytics internally that are really complex. There's a whole lot of reasons, and it's just thinking about what is that reason to get the best outcome. So I know there's two companies I've heard about. I don't really know anything about them. I do actually want to read about them, but it's Power Drill AI and Draft AI, I think. Because they say they do AI with visual analytics. I don't know a whole lot about them, but that's like kind of their thing. We actually, so like on the previous slide, there was a one of our products called Foundation. So we have analytics, and the heat map that I showed earlier, a heat map was made through using D3, which was one of those like where a web developer would create it. And we know where the data is coming from, and it's not created by like an EAI did not create that data visualization. However, the data that was in there was heavily enriched so that when you did this, when I did the search, it was able to find a lot more information because there was a lot more metadata around it that didn't previously exist. That was added onto it using AI. So that's an example of, you can use AI as a tool, but it's not necessarily generating it for you. So it's thinking about, are you trying to save time? Is it you don't have like the knowledge to create like super complex ones, because it's really hard to create some of these like really complex ones. Are you trying to do predictive analysis and create models around that? Once you figure out the answer to that question, then I think it's a lot easier to go from there. Frankly, I use Gemini a lot right now when I have a question about a company that has I know it has a website, so then I know what my criteria is, because then it can start to tell me where to look. Personally, that's what I've been doing, and it's been really helpful for that. Or literally just Googling, it's like, here is all my criteria, because search is super important, like what you're searching. So if you put in like, I need a tool that does this, these are my constraints, and you put all that in, you can start to get a sense. So that was a really long answer, but hopefully that's somewhat helpful.
Thank you so much, Eleanor. And yes, great answer, but also really good question. If there's any follow-up questions, feel free to add them in the Q&A. Moving on to the next one for now is, how do you predict data analytics will evolve in the next 5 to 10 years?
I can take
yeah, go ahead.
I think this ties into a little bit what Eleanor was saying as well. I think, you know, in the next, 5 to 10 years, I don't know the exact time frame, but I think a lot of people and different companies are already starting to explore these types of capabilities. But I think smart visualizations, which are generated and driven through AI, will be something we see in the next few years. So using AI to help to uncover some of those connections or hidden patterns that humans have a hard time differentiating. So I do think AI will continue to play a part in that. I think there will be a heavy emphasis on the predictive analytics, as Eleanor mentioned. So there will be algorithms to help predict some of those patterns, or even things like patient health trends, or early detection for diagnosis for different diseases. I think AI and those predictive analytics will have a heavy part in that as well. I think there will also be interactions through like augmented reality, even virtual reality. And that will really change the way that people interact with data. And also think, it'll be it'll make it more attractive for people as well. Like it's kind of like a novelty, right? So kind of ties back to like the democratization of data analytics, giving people a different way to engage, and also, you know, start to dig in and slice and dice the data. I also think there will be a heavy focus on real-time analytics. There is a concept called data streaming where, you know, all of the visualizations are being updated as new information is coming in on a constant basis. So I think it's just going to be better for competitive analysis, tracking, you know, what your competitors are doing, what patents that they're filing for or being granted. So again, just having some of those more real-time insights is going to be, I think, a huge focus for the next 5 to 10 years. Feel free to add, Eleanor, if there's anything else I left out.
Yeah, I think it's the making data like accessible and understandable, because a lot of obviously like the LLMs are very new, and I don't think it's going to have its own part to play. But as far as like the more like modeling out information, I think that part's going to become a lot more accessible to people that may not have had the knowledge to be able to create their own models previously. That's my also transparently hope that's where it's going to go. So yeah, because visualizations is like the easiest way to communicate. I truly believe it's the easiest way to quickly communicate the data, and then you have a starting point. You can actually start to talk about it from the same starting point.
Yeah,
Awesome.
I've even heard of a concept called data storytelling, where, you know, people are creating actual narratives around, you know, insights from the data to communicate in a very engaging, compelling way. So I think there's a lot of heavy emphasis on using data, but presenting it in a way that, yeah, just allows people to engage more easily or become more interested in what the data is saying.
Interesting. Hadn't heard about that. I like the idea though. Looks like that was the last question. Honestly, the perfect question to end the conversation today. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining. We hope you found this very interesting and valuable, and do feel free to reach out if any other questions come up or if you want additional information. Thanks, Heidi and Eleanor, for presenting to all of us today. And yeah, I really hope to see all of you on the next webinar.
Thanks for joining, everyone.
Yeah, thank you all.